Hey everybody, welcome to Missing Links with John, Brock, and myself, Stephen King, where we discuss what's missing in Web3 architecture. This week, we talk about Layer 3. For feedback, please go to missinglinks.fm, send us an email, give us some feedback on what we discuss and what you'd like us to cover next week. All right, let's get into it. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Missing Links with Brachiosaurus and myself. Stephen. John is in Italy and should be with us again next week. Brock, how you doing, man?
Doing well. And for those few listening, Stephen's new name is Esteban, so we can use that now.
You're going to get me with that for the Brachiosaurus.
Yes.
All right. Touche, amigo. Touche. Yep. So we're back from Bogota. Devcon was a really great experience. Brock got to go to a rave and had a good time. You got to do a little dancing, did you, Brock?
A little bit. Yeah, it was fun.
And you went on a crazy run. It was, I think it was, 10 miles?
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah. Elevation kicked my butt.
With 1,300 of straight vert of 1,300 feet. But anyway, so we're back and we got a bunch of topics that we're going to cover that are coming out of Devcon that I think will benefit whoever listens to this. But what we thought we'd talk about is Layer 3. So this is a new term to me. I was doing research for something else and it came up. Brock, I know you probably know all about this, but it makes a lot of sense. And I thought it would be interesting to cover, and especially because we were talking to the ZK guys down in Bogota. So let's just start from the very beginning. What is Layer 3?
Yeah. Layer 3 as a concept is roughly this idea of just layering the Ethereum ecosystem or any blockchain ecosystem. So layer ones are like base blockchains, Ethereum, Bitcoin, what have you. And then layer twos are generally some form of a rollup on top of a layer one. So this would be an Optimism or an Arbitrum, for instance. And the idea is that layer twos are providing scalability and performance improvements because they can take transactions off the main chain without sacrificing on security. And so layer 3 is really this concept of, okay, if we can do it at one level, can we go up another level and do, say, a roll up onto a roll up?
So it sounds like, Web3 is turning into traditional software, right? Traditional software is just layers upon layers upon layers until you get down to bytecode.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, So what's interesting is there's a good analogy to Polkadot and Kusama and this canary network. So L3 is sort of this canary network for the L2. So why can't you just have roll-ups upon roll-ups? I know there's kind of two ideas when it comes to, scaling in layer 2. Maybe I'm getting this wrong, but one is you can basically do the roll-up and you can compress the transactions, pretty significantly, but you can't kind of compress the data and compress the data and compress the data, right? So there has to be another way of, making the data smaller. And we'll get to the use cases in a minute, but why can't you compress the data like you can compress the transactions? It's because it's more.
Well, even the transactions themselves, you can't necessarily compress forever. Kind of the general rule of thumb with any compression is you can compress something once and you can't really do it again. Because if you can do it again, that likely means you could use a more effective algorithm in the first compression run. So when you're starting to look at like scaling solutions for Ethereum and trying to take transactions and data and batch them into some sort of compressed format, that's what the rollup turns into. So it's a bunch of transactions on an L2, roll them, compress them together, and then put that compressed version onto the L1. Since you're doing that compression at the L2 level, there's not going to be any scalability improvements going to an L3. And that sense, at least. Just simply because you can't compress that data any further. And if you could, then we should just be doing it at the L2 anyways.
Okay. And so from what I read about layer 3 is it's sort of a smart contract relationship with the L2, but there's a bridging mechanism to L1. Is that right?
So the world of L3s is not strongly defined. Everybody has some rough ideas, and there's a lot of proponents just against L3s altogether that basically say, well, why not just do a better L2? But the way any of these layers work is, yes, you have some sort of contract on the layer underneath. So whether that's on the L1 or the L2, and the layer above is doing some action and confirming that action through this contract on the layer beneath it.
Okay, so let me back up a little bit. So let's just focus on StarkNet for now, because that's what I've been reading most about. I'm sure there's other projects that are working on this, but basically, so with StarkNet, there's a smart contract tracking the L2. So the state root on the layer 1. So I'm trying to figure out how this whole proof is validated down the chain. The reason that I'm asking this question is because it's relevant for what we do, right? There's now data being, there's L1, which is sort of the base chain. And then there's L2, which is rollups. Okay, rollups make sense. They're centralized organizations, though. There's this 7-day lag. Don't really like that. But now we're going to go to L3. And so L3 is, maybe it's application specific. Maybe it's a trading entity that just has got a lot of information, needs a lot of speed, something like that. So how give me an analogy, if you can, for how all of this is tracked. I mean, is it all compartmentalized in its individual layer and then communicated sort of a metadata from sort of the higher layers down to the base layer?
More or less. The idea behind like a layer 2 rollup specifically. Or go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just we were talking about blobs, right? When we were in Bogota, and how some of this data on blobs is going to be almost lost, and nobody's going to really be capturing that. So is that relevant to this conversation?
A little bit. So that is, I'm forgetting the exact DIP. I think it's 4844. It might be 4444. Anyways, there's an Ethereum improvement proposal out to increase the size of call data by like making it a blob, and then also reducing the cost of using that. And the practical implications is we're trying to make L2s more impactful by increasing the amount of space that they can use on the main L1. And the way, all these L2s work is they have their own state. They are doing transactions just like you would on Ethereum, but they don't have a consensus mechanism. And so what that really means is they're like pseudo-centralized. So there's like a central authority that sequences transactions from the L2, puts them in order, batches them together, and then takes a verifiable proof, like a snapshot of that batch, and puts that snapshot on the L1. And so from a compression standpoint, the more you can shove in to that batch, i.e. by using like blobs on the L1 or larger call data, the more you can grow the L2 without impacting the underlying L1.
Basically, the way that I read it is, okay, there's a bridge from the base layer. So let's say the Ethereum chain to, let's say, Optimism. And I don't know what that bridge, I don't know how to define that bridge. It's I read that in Vitalik's post. And then from layer 2 to layer 3, it's a smart contract relationship. So I'm not sure what the difference is between the two. I know, with things like atomic swaps, you're using smart contracts basically to account for moving, let's say, a token between different chains. I don't understand what a bridge is doing. I mean, that still sounds like it's a smart contract, and it's doing a similar type of accounting, or am I not explaining that correctly?
My understanding is a bridge is that atomic swap with contracts, like it's one and the same.
Okay. So then if it's a bridge from layer 1 to layer 2, it's basically a bridge from layer 2 to layer 3, right? Or is it
the same technology could be used? Yeah.
okay? All right. So let's say that I am a company and I've got a high velocity of data, and it makes sense for me to have a portion of my stack on chain. So I'm going to build on Starkware, StarkNet, whatever it is. So basically, my app, Stephen King, company, whatever you want to call it. I'm generating all
John's
this
cookies.
John's Cookies. There you go. Even better. So John's Cookies. He's selling cookies like crazy, and he's got all this data on his customers. And so, what portion of that data? So those transactions, how are they being batched and then sent down the line so that there's an accounting for it on the Ethereum chain?
Yeah. So my current understanding, and this is rough, is that the portion that gets batched is effectively like a verifiable hash of the transaction itself. So like if you're like step way back, you could say that this is roughly equivalent to like the transaction hash. It's not that, but it's similar concept where it's just like an identifier for the transaction. And if you were to like replay that transaction from the L2, you would generate the same verifiable hash at the end. So those hashes then can be compressed and rolled up onto the L1.
Okay. So the L1 is going to be a very broad receipt of this, let's say 10 transactions from John's Cookies.eth. And then, so if John has to go back and do an accounting, he's going to say, okay, if I need to look at the base chain, I can. And that points to Optimism, right? That points upstream.
Yeah. There's current understanding is there's not a lot you can glean from the L1 itself. You kind of have to go to the L2 if you want to get any actual data.
I guess where I struggle is what's happening with all of the data other than the this pointing to, hey, this actually existed, this proof, which is important, but there's a lot of valuable data around that. Does that, because we're doing all this compression now, is that up to John's Cookies to account for all of that information, or is it up to a company like Etherscan, or are there other companies that are going to provide sort of an Etherscan like service?
Yeah, I mean the market landscape for like indexing that data is fascinating. That's like a whole other thing we could talk about for hours. But the short answer is that data lives on the L2, and the way this is all working is the L2 keeps the data, the state, and the L1 is just doing the consensus mechanism on a verification of those transactions. So the L1 secures it, but the L2 is what actually holds all that.
Okay. And then the L2, so Optimism as a company might be centralized, but they've got their own chain. It's kind of, sidechain may not be the right word, but they've got their own sort of decentralized it doesn't have a consensus layer, but they are accounting publicly for that information. So if something happened to the company itself, it wouldn't affect John's Cookies in terms of getting that data.
Right. Yeah. So they're still running a blockchain, but it's a blockchain without building blocks, I guess. Like the nodes are just listening and propagating data. They're not validating it and generating blocks. They have a centralized sequencer that says, hey, here's all the transactions on our network. We're going to put them in order, batch them together, turn those into a block, and then roll it up onto Ethereum.
Okay. What were you saying in Bogota? You said it's applications, or it's very specific indexing, but it's agnostic. And a couple of people were like, wait, what? It's specific and it's agnostic. And I don't know. I'll have to get the exact quote, but
yeah. So, well, for us, like a lot of people compare the indexing company to the graph because that's like what everybody thinks of in the space for indexing right now. But yeah, we are more agnostic in the sense that we don't care if it's blockchain data or not. We'll do blockchain data, IPFS, Arweave, off-chain, whatever. We'll pull it all in. And then we're also more specific than the graph because we're focused on use cases. So that's the common thread for what we index, instead of just like, we're going to get everything from Ethereum or everything from Polygon. It's a very specific, get the data that you need from whatever sources it happens to be from.
Yeah. So that makes complete sense. You threw it out there. I forget to who, but it was without that explanation.
I think we were talking to Arbitrum.
Yeah, and they were like, "Oh, okay, it's specific and agnostic," and you're like, "Hold on." Anyway, not to derail us. So okay, cool. So all right. So then we're going to layer 3. It's a concept, but it's kind of not a concept. There's actually people that are building out, and this is application specific. I haven't looked up any applications that are building on this. I've really just gone through Vitalik's blog posts and a few other resources. Have you looked into Starkware at all, or any of these other layer 3s?
A little bit. From what I can tell, like the practical use cases for something called an L3 are really getting back to like if your ecosystem is the L2, so all your users are on L2, all the resources you want are on L2. That could be like technology, monetary value, whatever it happens to be is on an L2. And you, for whatever reason, need your own like application specific chain. So this could be for privacy. It could be for some like large data scaling where you don't want to have to fight gas wars with the L2. And so you would build up onto what could be known as an L3. I think this closely resembles what a lot of people are calling app chains as well. I think it ties into that conversation. Just app chains aren't explicitly L3s. They could also be L2s.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense because everything. So hyperscalability, I guess is if you're going to, kind of analogize it to the app chain. So you've got more control over, I guess things become more deterministic, in terms of, like the performance, the cost. Ideally it gets cheaper the more layers you go up. Okay. So TBD, we're going to see maybe it's all applications. Maybe this is the layer that it seems like they're moving away from the base layer of Ethereum. So if they're moving into rollups, but maybe this is just one step above rollups where, that whole app chain discussion, whereas if we were going to build, Imbrex again or whatever app, we would say, well, let's just do it on layer 3. Now, it's still kind of a foggy picture to me of what layer 3 looks like.
So taking the Imbrex example, it was a decentralized application. We were trying to put real estate data on chain, right? So the way we were doing it is we were taking like JSON payloads that represent a house, and we were putting that on IPFS, taking the IPFS hash and putting that onto the Ethereum mainnet via like a contract call, right? So we had this contract mechanism that powered the whole thing, coupled with off-chain data storage. You could imagine a world where you build an application-specific chain that we fully control, is fully centralized to Imbrex, and within that chain, we can put all the data we want on it because we control it. So it's hypothetically super cheap, and we want every node to have all of the data. So we could structure it and architect it in such a way that all of those JSON payloads are natively on chain. It's just our own chain. And then we have some method for taking the data from there and putting it onto, say, an L2 or an L1 in some like verifiable way. So it's very similar in concept to what we were doing with IPFS. It's just the blockchain version.
Yeah, and you could imagine a world where, there's specific nodes within, maybe not, I don't know, IPFS, Swarm, whatever it is. I mean, would it make sense for there to be like a node system or a network for just real estate data, for just fintech data, for just, social media data, or does it really not matter at the end of the day? The bigger the network, the better. Why it doesn't do us any good to really compartmentalize them into different subjects.
I don't know. It's a lot of effort to run your own thing. So you got to have a really good reason. I feel like the 99.9% of use cases to be solved was just like an existing L2, if not even an L1. But yeah, you could imagine, say, a gaming company that's really, really resource intensive might have some specific use cases that they could address by building something like an L3 or their own dedicated sidechain.
Yeah, I'm trying to get at like what is the data, because the data, like the documents, the heavy processing is basically going to be done, not the processing, but the information itself, right, is going to be stored on Arweave or IPFS or Swarm. Really, the blockchain is just designed for the transaction data, yeah, or no? There's data that I'm not considering, or
No, you're right from an L1, even an L2 standpoint. I'm more like hypothesizing that you could architect a blockchain that's maybe has a block size of 1 GB instead of like a megabyte. So if you have control of all the nodes, you can do whatever you want. So you can make the block size massive, and the gas is free. So you can just dump all of your data directly on chain instead of going off chain to something like IPFS.
okay, so you can keep it all on chain. And is that why we're moving towards L3, or is it like, what is the use case? Is it just to scale basically infinitely until we can't scale anymore? So Visa's doing whatever 50,000 transactions per, I don't know how many seconds it is, but it's I know Ethereum is much slower, but it's trying to get to that part. Is this sort of like Moore's law of speed in transactions?
Not necessarily. Like the L3s don't by themselves speed up anything because of that compression issue. So you can't roll up a roll up. So there's no like fundamental speed gain you get from that. More so, it would be if you had like really heavy data needs and you don't want to pay gas, or you want to control the nodes for some like privacy protecting way. So you could imagine having a roll up where you write all the transactions within it, and the only thing you expose to a public blockchain is the like verifiable hash that those transactions existed.
Okay. This goes back to like the PII data conversation we were having. Okay. I'm still, the reason, I'll tell you where the reason I'm struggling with this is because basically I get that there's more data. That makes sense. But then we're compressing it so many times between layer 3 and the base chain that we're losing a lot of that data, right? We're saying we have all this we have much more data that we want to, and we want to speed things up, make gas cheaper, all makes sense. But by doing that, we've got all these, hands pointing down or pointing up. And, on that path, we're losing, I think, very valuable pieces of information. And I know we talked about other networks, other projects picking that up, including us. But I still, then if there's so much more data and we're just kind of compressing it anyway, doesn't that seem like it's kind of canceling itself out? I know it's not. I know that there's I'm missing something here. Like, is it the velocity? Is that what's?
Yeah, I think what it is, like at its core, the blockchain Ethereum, for instance, is meant to be a computation engine that's decentralized, and there's a like validated consensus layer within it. So it's meant to execute actions. It's not meant to be a store of data. And so we're finding lots of creative ways to still use the strong consensus mechanisms that Ethereum has to validate and disseminate data without actually putting the data directly on Ethereum.
Okay, that's helpful, and that's back to basically our computation and data are separate, right? So The Ethereum is the world computer, so it should only be doing computation. It's computers do store data, but if you have a lot of information, you get an external hard drive.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I'm getting there, Brock. I appreciate that. So is there anything else? Is there anything else you want to go over? I mean, we're gonna parse this into, the last discussion that we were having, but I think somebody else will get value out of this, because there's got to be other people that are like me that are trying to make sense of all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer to L3s is we don't have a good reason to use them yet. Like, they could just be other L2s. And so I think people are trying to come up with reasons, and StarkNet arguably has a decent one, because their L2 by design is it's powered by ZK proofs, and so you could theoretically like build semi-private chains on top of it. So that would be like an L3 use case. But outside of that, like for application specific data, just put it on an L2 or build your own rollup onto L1. There's just, I don't know. I think that's why there's a lot of confusion, because there's not a lot of reason to use an L3.
Why wouldn't you build your own rollup? Is there a framework for that? Like if I'm Microsoft, Microsoft's not a good example. They're a tech company. If I'm KPMG and I can see that there's value in moving some of our business into the Web3 ecosystem, is there a framework for rollups, or would you just go to Optimism because they've already done the heavy lift?
Yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to see somebody do rollups as a service for a long time, and I think Optimism is there. They have like an enterprise arm trying to do exactly this. I don't know that there's a framework per se. They just have the know-how to do it. Yeah, side tangent. I'm gonna try to build my own, but
I mean, how hard is it to do it?
It's like totally. I don't know. There's no like tutorial on how to build your own rollup right now.
So there's not like, it's not like just, if you're going to, like a good example was one of the banks we were working with. They basically just copied the Ethereum blockchain, and then they would just tweak it to their own needs, right? Can you do that with a rollup?
Yep.
Cool.
Theoretically. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, so the challenge now is that enterprises don't even know. You can't talk to them about any of this stuff. But if you could sort of say, hey, look, you can have your own private chain that can have a handshake with the public chain. You can have all your important information, but then you've either got this backup or you've got this proof in case you need to show clients or federal agencies or
Yep.
whatever it is. Okay. Because, in 2017, we had this idea of they were private blockchains, but I forget the term that was going around. Do you remember that? It was...
Oh, the parachains?
Yeah, the permissioned... I don't know. There was a couple of enterprises playing around with the idea, but I guess the issue at the time was, how does the handshake work between this permissioned chain and then something like Ethereum? And I don't think they had those kinks worked out, but it seems like Optimism took care of that.
Yeah, there's
in a centralized way, nonetheless.
Right. But there seems to be a few solutions out there. They're all centralized for now, but Arbitrum, Optimism, they're trying to figure out how to decentralize that piece.
It's these two worlds. It's like being a human here in the physical world, and then trying to walk into the spiritual world for a little while. We need like the LSD equivalent of that we can insert into technology, or like something that can at least temporarily get us into that world, because this is a difficult challenge. This is something that has been, atomic swaps, when we first were learning about this or playing around with it, that was years ago. And these ideas have been written about since, I don't know, the 2015, probably earlier than that, actually.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there you have it. Brock's going to solve this problem, and we're going to have no more issues with centralization going forward. So, Brock, on behalf of everybody in Web3, thank you.
I make no promises. My solution will be fully centralized and in my control, but if you want it, it'll be there.
Yeah, you just have to pay big money.
Right.
Well, I think we'll wrap it there because my head's spinning, and so this will be a good discussion to come back with, and I think it's a good intro. I mean, there needs to be like an ELI5 for some of these things, but
everything.
Yeah, but I would suggest go to Vitalik's blog because he actually is usually above my pay grade, but he breaks down the different layers pretty thoughtfully. So